Welcome. Thanks for coming to History Night. How many have attended other History Nights? Okay, almost everybody. Well, the plan is to offer these free events 3 times a year from 7 o'clock until 8:30 in the evening during April, July, and October. Thanks to the Springettsbury Township supervisors for their support of History Nights. Because this room is actually getting used almost 24/7, it seems like lately. I want to apologize to those that showed up last Wednesday expecting this presentation. It turns out the township made a mistake in the summer Springettsbury Township news that was mailed to all township residents, where the calendar of events listed July 8th as History Night, which was errantly because it repeated July 8th, which was the correct History Night last year. We do not have Wednesday History Nights during July so as not to compete for parking with the concerts in the park. Now, the article in the summer edition of the Springettsbury Township News for this event had the correct date, so the township had both dates. So I apologize for everybody that showed up last week, which I understand they showed up for a yoga exercise group that was in the room. Okay, a little housekeeping. Please silence your phones. The restrooms are located through that door and back the hallway to your left. Please hold your questions and discussions until the end of the presentation. As with all History Nights, this event is being recorded with the content viewable several weeks later as a YouTube video on the Springettsbury Township website. Any questions? Okay, Carol Tanzola, the founder and president of Friends of Camp Security, will introduce the speaker. However, it was through Carol's tenacity and leadership of the Friends of Camp Security that the Camp Security is preserved for the current generation and future generations. So let's give her a round of applause in appreciation. Carol?
Thank you. I was just a squeaky wheel that they couldn't stop. Well, I asked John to give me some hints on how to introduce him. Typical archaeologist and young man, I get 3 sentences, and then I get a full paragraph. So little by little, we're going to piece all this together. True young man. John specializes in historical archaeology, basically the 18th century. He's been with us at Camp Security since, what did you say, 2014? 15? In one capacity or another. Right now, he's our lead archaeologist. He organizes everything. He also helps us write our grants, proposals, whatever, that we can continue the research that we do at the site. Beyond that, what he does in real life, other than digging the dirt in Springettsbury Township, is he is a staff archaeologist at George Washington's Mount Vernon. So he is a busy young man. We are truly blessed to have him, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. We store all the stuff in our barn, and he comes and we put it away, and then we take it out when we're digging again. But we've become good friends, and I will say probably the thing that touched me most if we've gone through this challenge of trying to find evidence of Camp Security is that, I don't know how many years ago, John called me and he said, "Are you home?" "Yes." "Well, I think maybe you should come down here to the dig site." And I said, "Oh, did you find something? Because this has been like looking for a needle in a haystack." And he said, I think you ought to come down. And I said, "Well, you're going to tell me?" He said, "No, when can you leave?" I said, 5 minutes. He said, I'll wait till you get here. So I get down to the site, John takes me, walks me over, and he goes, "You see that? And you see that? And you see that?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Those are the post holes from the stockade." I think I cried half the way home because I finally felt somewhat vindicated, if you can imagine. But anyway, without further ado, I'm going to let John tell his story and the marvelous things that he's done for camp security and the search for camp security. John?
All right, well, thank you, Carol, for that wonderful introduction. I'm sorry I didn't give you enough material, but you did wonderfully either way. I knew you'd do it. So if you go down Market Street, pretty close to Locust Grove Road, you'll see this historic marker marking the site of camp security. Except it's not there. You still have to go down Locust Grove Road about 3/4 of a mile. And you'll find this inconspicuous farm field. This is where 1,500 British prisoners of war, along with their families, were detained for 2 years. The camp featured a stockade, guardhouses, huts, even a hospital and cemetery. But there's no sign of any of it. There's nothing marking the site. There's no physical evidence on the surface to speak of. Hundreds of people drive past here every day, completely unaware of the field's history. For all intents and purposes, the site is invisible, both physically and in the minds of those passing by. So the central challenge for a site like camp security is, how do we preserve the site's integrity or protect it from development? This field is a real dream for land developers. How do we share the site with the broader public to help make it less invisible in their minds? And how do we find elements of the site buried under the surface or otherwise research this site? These are universal challenges for historic preservation. And I believe the greatest tool in our toolkit at Camp Security has been community archaeology. And tonight I want to talk about what we've learned in the past decade of research, share some of our most recent findings, and the impact that our particular brand of community archaeology has had. But before I get there, I want to set the historic scene for you a bit. When you close your eyes and imagine a prisoner of war camp, as I'm sure we all do, you probably picture something like this. A domineering space with razor wire and guard towers. Every inch is designed to control and survey its occupants. I want you to wipe that from your mind. Instead, we should meditate on the intricacies of the POW policy set by the Continental Congress. They declared to treat captives as prisoners of war, but with humanity. And that's it. The real issues like feeding and clothing prisoners, arranging guards, building or structuring the prison itself was all up to local committees of safety. Congress handed them British POWs and basically told them to figure it out. Lancaster was the test case early on in the war. Congress preferred Lancaster because they had a ready-made barracks left over from the French-Indian War. And when prisoners arrived, they were put up in the barracks, but slowly over time they intermingled with the local population. Congress loved this. They thought that these interactions would breed sympathy amongst the prisoners for the revolutionary cause. This turned out to be a bad idea. Tensions flared up, and this was exacerbated when Lancaster residents got word of their sons, husbands, and fathers being killed or maimed on the front lines. One of my favorite quotes comes from a British officer who wrote that he was invited to smell a hatchet and was reminded of its agreeable effects on the skull. George Ross wrote to Congress begging for a stockade to be built, so the mischief of the prisoner population could be segregated and controlled. Congress eventually relented, and a stockade was constructed around the Lancaster barracks. This plan was approved by Congress to be the continental model for prison camp construction. It features blockhouses at each corner, 3 of which serve as guardhouses, while the last was a hospital and carpentry shop. The stockade itself was made up of large oak logs set every 10 feet, with smaller logs filling in the gaps in between. These were all secured with a rail running along the top of the exterior of the stockade, presenting a smooth surface to the prisoners within. The stockade was a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it provided immediate relief, but it also made Lancaster the go-to destination for British POWs. As the camp population swelled, the Committee of Safety could no longer afford to feed and clothe their prisoners. So a parole system was set up that allowed prisoners to work on surrounding farms. And this parole system was employed in other camps during the war. And for the stockade, we see a similar pattern at the prison camp in Charlottesville, Virginia, and maybe Camp Security, though we can't be sure since we don't have any maps from the site. This drawing in Sergeant Roger Lamb's journal is probably the closest thing we have. Camp Security was constructed in 1781 after the prison camp in Charlottesville was closed due to British advancements in the South. These prisoners were known as the Convention Army. They were captured after the Battle of Saratoga in 1777 and had spent most of the war in captivity. While they had been kept together throughout that time, they were separated when they left Charlottesville. British officers went to Lancaster, Hessians Reading, and enlisted men were sent to Camp Security. It's important to note that we have no records of Hessians being at Camp Security. This is going to be a repeated theme. Camp Security's construction was a hurried affair. The order to construct the camp was given in early July, and the British prisoners were encamped there as soon as August 2nd. The York County Militia was tasked with clearing a wooded lot, fashioning logs into picket, and erecting a stockade roughly 2 acres in size, with accompanying blockhouses and huts. Roughly 100 men were called upon to complete the work within 1 month. Just 5 days prior to the prisoners' arrival, Lieutenant William Scott reported that he had furnished upwards of 100 men to guard the prisoners, but would require near double that number until the necessary works on the encampment were erected. The camp likely wasn't finished when the first prisoners arrived or entered Camp Security, so they were enlisted to build their own prison. While the camp featured a stockade, roughly 400 men, 200 women, and 200 children were permitted to build their own village of huts on the hill outside of the stockade. These prisoners weren't considered dangerous and were given privileges to travel to downtown York or neighboring farms. Soldiers from General Cornwallis's army captured at Yorktown entered the camp in January 1782. They were considered dangerous and quickly occupied the stockade. These 2 places were referred to as Camp Security and Indulgence, one so named for the stockade and guard, while the other for the relative freedom that prisoners were afforded. One account notes the level of industry happening at Camp Indulgence, with men, women, and children making lace, buckles, spoons, and other mechanical trades. These products were then sold or traded to neighboring farms or in downtown York, painting a picture of Camp Indulgence as not only featuring greater liberty, but also a level of self-sufficiency. For his part, Sergeant Roger Lamb, the guy whose journals document much of what we know about Camp Security, has an interesting story. He was captured at Saratoga and was part of the Convention Army, but escaped along the journey to Charlottesville. He was then recaptured at Yorktown, and when he was brought to Camp Security, he was able to convince the guards that he was a Convention Army prisoner. Prisoners then made him a hut to live in at Camp Indulgence. But Roger Lamb was determined to get back into the fight. He tried to convince the Indulgence prisoners to escape with him, but they refused. And for good reason. They had been captives for over 4 years, They had families with them. They were settled into huts and lives that they had built for themselves. Instead, Lamb recruited 7 prisoners in behind the stockade to jump over the stockade. They then slipped out of the camp, crossed the Susquehanna, and rejoined the British Army in New York. After the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783, Camp Security was disassembled, its parts used for firewood and fencing for surrounding farms. The camp's exact location fell out of public memory in the centuries after its abandonment, but the place always remained in the public consciousness. This 19th century Pennsylvania Dutch song remembers Camp Security as a place where the ghosts of Hessian prisoners came out of Hessian Hollow every Christmas night. They decry their commanding officer, Colonel Rahl, for surrendering to General Washington and condemning him to die at Camp Security. Now, remember, there were no Hessians at Camp Security, and this will also be repeated. Just as an aside, every conflict site, think sites like Gettysburg or battlefield sites, worth its salt needs a good ghost story or two. We're lucky that our ghosts are Christmas ghosts. And ghosts continue to be a part of Camp Security. We still have ghost investigators who come out and walk through the woods at night hoping to find evidence of the paranormal. Much of this stems from the camp cemetery, which is noted in several sources as being constructed about a quarter mile from the camps, though we don't currently know where this cemetery was. Oral histories place it in various locations around the site, but the most consistent accounts have it located somewhere in Penn Oaks development. We've heard rumors that when Penn Oaks was constructed in the 1970s, workers found evidence of the cemetery, but this hasn't been confirmed in any way outside of local rumors. The Penn Oaks development was slated to expand eastward into the present-day fields. So in 1979, the State Museum excavated one of the fields. This is the Weast, what we call the Weast Upper Field. They found over 50 refuse pits, thousands of artifacts, including over 600 straight pins, thimbles, and buttons. Considering the collection mirrored what Sergeant Lamb described as industry at Camp Indulgence, the lack of structural evidence, such as a stockade, and the location being on a hill relative to the surrounding fields, this was determined to be the site of Camp Indulgence. In the decades after the State Museum's discovery, development interest renewed. Carol Tanzola established the Friends of Camp Security in 1999 to help raise funds for the purchase of the property. This is a really great picture of Carol. She's just aggressively pointing. It's very serious.
Pointing at the bulldozer, don't you dare.
Don't, yeah, that's right. These efforts were successful, and the current 160-acre preservation area became Springettsbury Township property. The Friends of Camp Security then led efforts to investigate the site, and they consulted Steve Warfel to do the work. And Steve was the senior archaeologist for the State Museum for many, many years, I think since from 1980 to 2008 or so. So Steve established the community archaeology program that we know today. When I talk about community archaeology, as opposed to public archaeology or just regular archaeology, I make the distinction in that the program not only involves volunteer participation in the archaeological process, things like field work or lab work, but the community drives the entire project. The Friends of Camp Security set the broad research goals. They handle project logistics, interface with township officials. They raise funds, manage grants, communicate with media organizations, and give public presentations. The finer details of research, design, and strategy are still handled by professional archaeologists, and all volunteer activity is managed by those archaeologists. Generally speaking, the community steers the ship, and the archaeologists help power the engine. So the project Steve started in 2014 has been running consistently since then and has involved 215 volunteers who have donated over 13,000 man-hours. So who are these crazy people? I don't keep hard numbers on this, but this is just my general impression. A lot of these people are teachers. Teaching subjects from English, history, gym, or science. We have a lot of veterans who have sort of obvious connection to the site. Reenactors and just avid history lovers. Students, some high school students and sort of early college students. I'd say they probably get the greatest benefit out of our project because they get to test the waters early on in their career if they like archaeology or not. There's a lot of stories out there of somebody who loves the idea of archaeology, spends a lot of money, goes to school for 4 years, gets a real job and finds out, oh, this is a lot of work. It's a lot of digging. I don't like that. You get to learn that early on by volunteering at a site like Camp Security. And we also have professional archaeologists. These are the hardest of the hardcore. They can't get enough archaeology in their lives, so they come out and they volunteer, and we're always happy to have them. Something these people all tend to have in common is that they're descendants of camp guards. Some descendants have come all the way from Florida to volunteer. And everyone here enters the project with a certain set of expectations. Some people love it, and they keep coming back year after year. Others hate it, and they show up for an afternoon, and I never see them again. I've always found that expectations are most inflated when it comes to sort of the fancier sciencey things like remote sensing, ground penetrating radar, LiDAR, these sort of newer technologies that are coming out. And a lot of that, the misconceptions around those things stem from sort of popular media or how archaeology is portrayed in popular media. Outlets like National Geographic present an entertainment-focused archaeology geared towards showing the best of the best results. Nat Geo is trying to sell magazines or get clicks, and if they presented the totality of archaeological research, it'd probably look closer to something like this. Something tells me the issue on the right won't sell very well. That's not to say that things like ground penetrating radar and LiDAR aren't valuable, and we have done those things at Camp Security. These examples are from Mount Vernon. As you can see, GPR sometimes will show you lots of wonderful little lines, and these are utility lines. Now, this big one in the center is actually a 1775 vaulted brick drain. It's this big guy right here. So it can show you historic features under the ground, for sure. Same thing with LiDAR. LiDAR is really famous for sites in like Mesoamerica or like the Amazon, where there's a lot of tree foliage, and you can fly a plane over and you can see temples and things that are just sort of buried under the foliage. LiDAR is sort of like infrared beams that are shot in rapid succession. The light will come down, it'll hit the ground, and then bounce back up off the ground, and that distance is measured. And you shotgun those beams down, and some of the beams, if you do it densely enough, will get through the foliage of trees. Essentially what it does is it maps the ground surface. So what you're looking at here in this image is sort of like a bas relief of the ground. And in doing that, you can find subtle features that would have been there in the past. So this is from Union Farm. This is one of Washington's outlying farms. And this line here is the road that would have gone through the farm. And on each side of the road, there was an enslaved quarter over here, and then there would have been the overseer's house over here, and those two would have separated by the road. But that road today isn't there anymore. But we can still see it by using LiDAR. So these technologies are very valuable, but they're not always perfect, and they're not like, just do LiDAR and you'll figure out everything. It's way more complicated than that. So one of the main techniques that we've used at Camp Security, and is pretty common on most sites, are metal detecting and surface collection. So on the left there are people doing surface collection. And it's simply, you walk across the ground with your eyes on the ground, you look for an artifact. If you find an artifact, you put a pin flag in there, and then we map the location of that artifact. Metal detecting works this very similar way. When you get a hit, you dig up your hit, and then you put a flag there. We'll come along, map it. What this gives us is a distribution of all the artifacts in the field. And then we have ground penetrating radar. So ground penetrating radar, it's pretty simple. You have this little box. Let's see if this works. Yeah, it does in a video. You have this box and it shoots down radar waves into the ground. Again, rapid succession, super, super quick. It usually does about 200 scans per second. It then measures, it sends a wave down into the ground, and then it measures the return signal coming back. And you keep doing that as you go across the field. And really what you're looking for are instances where there's some contrast. So if you're on normal dirt, you get pretty steady signal. And then if you hit something that's disturbed, like somebody dug a hole there in the past or something, you get a new signal, and then you go past it, and then you get a regular signal again. This all gets these signals and everything. You typically do run GPR in what we call transects, or just lines. You just walk straight. This survey, the general standard is every 25 centimeters you do a line. And you put that all together into a program, and it stitches everything, and you can make like a little 3D model, and you can scan up and down. This is not from Camp Security. On the right, this is an example from a cemetery. Each one of those little white blobs is a grave shaft. So another thing that's more techy and interesting that we've done are drones. So if you think about it, when you have, let's say you have a grass field, just like we have at Camp Security, and at some part of that field has been dug into sometime in the past, that disturbed soil will provide better nutrients to the grass or whatever's growing in that field. And that grass will then look greener. And in some cases, you can find sites simply by taking a photo from above during the summer. This is an example from some of our drone imagery. And there are, in fact, two confirmed features, two pits, that we dug in this. Now, this was taken before we actually dug those pits. Take a second and see if you can find where the pits are in that image. Okay, if you guessed there, congratulations. You found the pits. And these are pretty deep pits. You can see we're losing Jane. She's but yeah, then you see the problem with that, and then you expand it. It's really difficult to know what's real, what's natural. There are probably cultural things in there that we might be able to pick out, maybe, but you never really know unless you excavate. So at the end of the day, we can do all the GPR in the world, we can do all the fun LiDAR, the drone stuff, we can do all of that, but at the end of the day, we have to dig to confirm what we think we might see. So, camp security, like I said, camp security fell out of use in 1783. It eventually returned to farmland and was plowed for probably several hundred years. That plowing has the effect of creating a plow zone. That's this dirt right here. So over here you see this is an example of untouched dirt, unplowed dirt, and then this is plow zone. Basically the entire fields, everywhere we dig at Camp Security, is in plow zone. Our goal when we excavate is simply to remove this plow zone so then we can see features or instances where people dug past where the plow zone has disturbed. So I get this question a lot, are you digging deep enough? All we're doing is removing this layer. That's all we have to do in order to see features. And this is an example of the process in real time. This is yeah. That's right. That's right. Yeah. So we typically don't want to use like a backhoe or anything like that for this because a lot of this we want to get just right on top of the what we call the subsoil, that sort of more lighter yellow colored dirt at the bottom. And using machinery, it's a little bit more difficult, and we want to make sure we're not destroying anything important accidentally. All right, that's enough of that. Okay, so one of the major benefits of a long-running archaeological program is that it affords us the luxury to evolve and change our research design as we get more information. The primary goal, archaeologically, for years has been to locate the camp stockade. When Steve began this endeavor in 2014, he started with shoveled test pits, and that's these guys right here, these circular pits. The problem is that a stockade trench could sneak in between your pits. So typically you'll have a pit here and then maybe 10 feet to the east you'll have another pit, and you just keep that pattern going for a whole grid. But the stockade could, in theory, go between, you could just be unlucky, and stockade could go between your pits. So the following year, Steve moved to linear excavation trenches. The idea being that our trench should be able to intersect the stockade trench. We would excavate in a 2-acre area. That's roughly the size of the stockade based on historic accounts, or it would encompass a good bit of it. And position trenches in a way that if a stockade was running through the project area, it would necessarily be intercepted. We use this method to eliminate space 2 acres at a time. And it was implemented from 2015 to 2021. So we're talking 6 years. In 2022, we moved away from test trenches and started open area excavation. So we just started opening up big areas. We did this because we were successful, the trenches were successful in finding a series of post holes. So we wanted to expand around those posts and just see what structure those posts might be. In the process of chasing posts, we stumbled across the sought-after stockade. And it's always better to be lucky than good in this case. So great, we found the thing. It's located around 175 yards downhill from the camp indulgence site. So we have historic accounts that describe the distance between the stockade and camp indulgence as being 200 yards. So that matches historic accounts pretty well. It's a trench. of mostly redeposited subsoil, so dirt that was dug out and then thrown back in, with faint post molds throughout. So those are these little holes here. These are the posts that were stabbed into the trench of the stockade. So the construction of this thing was that you would dig a trench, and then you would set your posts down in that trench. Now the posts were typically sharpened at both ends, so they were jabbed into the trench a bit to hold them. And then the trench was backfilled. And that's how you secured your stockade into the ground. So getting to this point took 8 years and involved multiple adjustments to our research design. We started with STPs, or shovel test pits, then test trenches, then open area excavation. And now we're employing some of the fancier technology. So we're employing GPR and with targeted ground truthing units. So we're trying out GPR, and then we're testing the results of that GPR. The goal is to define the stockade footprint without excavating or exposing all of it, because archaeology is a destructive process. Once we dig this thing out, it's gone forever. That's what archaeology is. It's one of the questions of whether archaeology is a science, because we destroy our subjects. We can never repeat the experiment. And in this case, that portion of the stockade is gone forever. But we have photographs of it. We keep meticulous records of everything, lots of photos. So that brings me to sort of the current phase of what we're doing at Camp Security. It's driven by this National Park Service project. So I think it was in 2024, the Friends of Camp Security received a grant from the National Park Service American Battlefield Protection Program. The goal of the project is to expand on the stockade, ideally determine its shape or size, and locate any other evidence of the camp. The research design called for 3 phases. The first was the GPR, ground penetrating radar, of the entire Weiss Lower field. So that's the field that we found the stockade in. The second was a metal detecting survey across both the lower field where the stockade was found and the upper field where Camp Indulgence was found. And the third was excavation to confirm or deny the results of those 2. So what you see here is a beautiful picture of the night sky. So these are what we call GPR slices. Each one of these little blocks, you can kind of determine that they're in blocks. Each one of these is 20 by 20 meters. So it took about, I want to say, 2 months in 2025. Indiana University of Pennsylvania came out and did this. And they did it at the worst time. They did it in August, and they were dying. but they did it. And to collect this data, what they did was they started at a grid, at a corner, and then they went across it once, and then they walked back and went again, walked back and went again. And they did that 81 times for each block. So that comes out to, if you total it up, close to 4,000 lines of data that they collected. And what you'll notice when you look at this is that it's kind of a mess. There's nothing super duper clear. If you remember the image I showed you of GPR at Mount Vernon, there's nothing really like that here. You'll notice that there's like these lines that come through here. Those lines are plow scars. In some cases, they're actually reflections from the mowing of the field that happened right before the data was collected. You'll see this lima bean guy up here. That is a big erosion gully. So that's a natural sort of erosional pool under the ground. There's a lot of like little individual dots sort of splattered all over the place. In a lot of cases, those are rocks. Rocks they're different than the surrounding soil, and so they have a unique signature that they send up, and it can be very tricky. So the data itself, just on its face, is very, very messy. And we kind of expect that for this field because of all the rocks, because of the previous plowing, because of the mowing, which we can't do anything about. We need the field mowed to collect the data. Here's the IUP's analysis of this. So they basically just drew out everything that they could potentially be a cultural feature or anomaly. Again, it's very messy, sort of all over the place. I guarantee you, they had over, I think, 50 anomalies. That doesn't include what they call linear anomalies. Things like this guy, that's a linear anomaly. Overall, we don't know what is natural, or just a bunch of rocks, or cultural, like an actual hut or something along those lines. The only way to know that is to excavate. There are some contenders here. So this guy right here is the piece of the stockade that we exposed. And you can see that keeps running down, and then there's like a line coming out here. Same thing over here, so it comes out and down and then this way. So that's a possibility, but it's very fragmentary. And that's to be expected for GPR. A lot of times you'll find just a little piece of something. So yeah. So for the metal detecting, so IUP did the GPR in the summer of 2025, and then in the fall, Juniata College, along with the Veterans Archaeology Program, came out and did the metal detecting survey. So they surveyed both the lower and upper fields, so where the stockade was and where Camp Indulgence was. And they had pretty great results. They collected around 150 objects, the majority of which are 18th century. For example, these are some coins that they found. They're all pretty well worn, but most are King George II coins dating to about the mid-18th century. We also have a number of buttons, and many having ornate decoration, some with some German-inspired floral decoration. There's some more buttons. This is my favorite one right here. Sort of like Greco-Roman. It's very, very interesting. This is a really great one. So these are cufflinks. They're pewter. The fact that it's pewter is really interesting because pewter tends to not survive in the ground very well. But these survived wonderfully for whatever reason. That's some chemistry I don't know. But they're intact and they're still linked together. They have really beautiful etched decoration on their face, which is great. We also have buckles. Now, in the 18th century, you have a whole bunch of buckles, a bunch of different types of buckles. These are knee buckles. Again, they would help support your knee, or buckle your pant around your leg at your knee there. And we have shoe buckles. Pretty self-explanatory. You all have shoe buckles. These are some of the more interesting artifacts in my opinion. So we have thimbles. Now, one of these thimbles is extremely small, almost too small for an adult. So it's very possible that it was actually for a child. We know and these were found in the Camp Indulgence field. We know that children at Camp Indulgence were involved in the process of making things, tatting lace, etc. And so this could be some of our first evidence of that archaeologically. We also have hem weights. That's what this is right here. So these are little weights that ladies would sew into their dresses to keep their hem down. Again, this is the first object that we can directly tie to women. We have a lot of straight pins, a lot of thimbles that we've collected from this field, but straight pins and thimbles aren't necessarily evidence of women. I was in the military and I kept a sewing kit, but I did not keep hem weights. So this is a really exciting find for us.
What were the pins made of?
Copper alloy. Yep. And then this one is great. So any guesses as to what this could be? Is anybody in band? Yeah, you guys can't say because you know. Anybody in band in like high school or something? So this is an oboe key. So it likely originated, we think, from a Hessian military band. Now, if you remember, there were no Hessians at Camp Security, but the convention prisoners had lived with them for many years prior to their coming to Camp Security. So this oboe key likely originated from a Hessian, but somehow made its way into the hands of a British POW who was then held captive at Camp Security. So if there are no Hessians at Camp Security, why all the German stuff? So we've got like German decorated buttons. If you look at the pottery, a lot of it is very Germanically styled pottery. We have a Hessian oboe key. There's just a lot of German influence in the artifacts that we're pulling out of the ground here. I think this German influence primarily is coming from the local area. But also, this object tells us that there's also prior interactions with Hessians that are influencing the material culture. It's important to remember that pots aren't people. So, what I mean by that is, like, if you finding chopsticks in somebody's kitchen doesn't necessarily make them Asian. Same is true for the German material culture that we're finding here at Camp Security. One of the interesting things are the lead shot. So we have varying calibers that we found throughout the years, and they're all in varying states. So some are squashed, showing evidence of impact. Others are completely fined, so most likely just dropped. And when you look at the varying calibers, we can kind of figure out the typical armaments that would have been at Camp Security. And that's what this is. So just a pretty good variety, and that's pretty expected for militias at the time. Now, if you were to take the lead shot and plot it out on the field, you start to see an interesting pattern. Namely, you see this line right here. So this is in what we call the row lower field. If you're driving down Locust Grove Road, which isn't on this map, but it's like around here. This is like Locust Grove Road. If you're driving down Locust Grove Road, you can see this field from the road. The shot in this field primarily is fired. The shot elsewhere is less so. There are some examples where they're fired, but primarily most of our fired shot comes from that field, and it's in a pretty straight line. To me, this is pretty indicative of a firing line or target practice. What's also interesting, and it's not on this map, I think it's on the next map, but I'll talk about it now, is in this corner is where we found a decent amount of 18th century artifacts. Not shot, but like glass, ceramics, that kind of thing. So most likely what I think is happening is that people are congregating here and then they're stepping out here to then target practice. When I say people, I'm talking about guards, not so much prisoners. What's also interesting on this map is where the lead shot isn't. We don't have a lot of lead shot down here, and this is where Camp Indulgence is. So this is where the prisoners and their families are. Not a lot of lead shot here. Not a lot of lead shot sort of in the middle of this field, and this is where we found the stockade. But we are seeing lead shot around that area. So I think the lead shot might be telling us rough positions of where guards and prisoners are. So now if we take a step back and we look at the broad distribution of all 18th century artifacts. So this is everything that we've collected that's 18th century from 2000 to 2025. So 25 years of archaeological research. This is the fruits of our labor. What you see here is this is a what we call a kernel density map. It's just a density map showing where the artifacts mostly are, and this area stands out really well. Again, here is Camp Indulgence. What's also interesting is that Camp Indulgence, where they excavated, is right about here, this upper third of the field, and we see artifacts just continuing down the rest of the field. We have never surveyed this field, except for in 2014, this is where the STP survey or shovel test survey was. But outside of that, we've never actually surface collected or metal detected what we call the row upper field. Okay. So I guess this was a few weeks ago. We just finished up excavation in our attempts to try and confirm or deny the GPR results. So in gray on this map are the anomalies that IUP pointed out to us. In red are our test units that we excavated, and we dug 5 by 5 foot square test units, trying to confirm or deny the lines here, trying to test this area out. You'll notice at the bottom, in the bottom southwest corner here, there's no anomalies. Why is that? It's because we weren't able to test here with the GPR. So that area is a pretty decent slope, and so we didn't take the GPR over that slope in fear that our lines might start to get wavy and it would screw up the data. So, but ironically, that is where that red spot was. So ideally we would have data there, but we don't. So what we did instead is that we did a stratified random sample. Just a fancy way of saying we randomly sampled that area just to see if we could find something interesting. Okay, so here are some of the things that we saw in the ground from our test units. This one was really interesting and perplexed me to no end. If you see here in the middle, this really dark spot, that is full of charcoal. We pulled out probably about a couple fist-sized chunks of charcoal. So a big burning event happened here. It has sort of like these tendrils that come out, this like darker soil that's smearing across here. That ended up being something like a trench that came across this charcoal dense section of the feature. I'm still debating on terms of what this is. Right now I'm leaning towards a burnt out post. So a post that was set into the ground and then was attempted to be pulled or removed, hence the digging around it, the sort of trenching that happened. And then a final, we give up, we're gonna burn it. And that's what you're left with, is a bunch of charcoal. We didn't get any artifacts out of this, frustratingly. That's kind of a common theme at Camp Security. There's not a ton of artifacts at Camp Security. But either way, a pretty interesting feature. Not my favorite, but definitely the most frustrating one. Now, these are interesting. These are post molds. So what's a post mold as opposed to a post hole? The hole is when, let's say you're going to set in a post, you'll first dig a hole to then set your post in. That hole that you dig is called the post hole. When you set your post in, you backfill that hole, and then sometime later you decide, I don't want the post anymore, or it's rotting, I need to replace it, whatever. You grab the post, you pull it out. That leaves a void in the ground that sometimes people will just backfill. I've seen post molds with bricks in them. That void and that subsequent filling, that's called the post molds, and that's what we see here. We see these dark sort of circles. That is where a post once stood. In this case, on the right, we don't see the hole very well. The one on the left, we do see the hole a bit. So this yellow sort of ring around that dark circle, that yellow ring is the hole. So that was the original hole someone dug to set their post. Now, one of these posts, that was the post on the right, is really exciting because in 2015, Steve dug one of his trenches and he found a few posts in the trench. Now, these 3 posts here are on 8-foot centers, so they're 8 feet apart, which is pretty classic 18th century construction style. And so I went out this year and I tried to figure out, okay, where's the next post? If it's running in a straight line east-west, we can dig a unit over here and we should land on a post. We did not find a post. We found nothing. So then that tells me that it's going either north or south. Well, Steve already handled south for us, so then we tested north. This was the last unit we dug this past season, and we found a post mold. So that tells me that we're probably not dealing with a fence, considering that it's 8-foot centers. It's probably a structure. Now, common dimensions in the 18th century for 8-foot centers, it's going to be something like either 16 by 16 or 16 by 24. In this case, this is what I'm showing you here is 16 by 24. And the construction method for these types of things, it looks something like this. Like I said, you'll dig your post hole, and then you'll set your posts. Typically, the post will be connected by a rail of some kind, and then hoist up straight up. If you work in construction or anything like that, this might be kind of familiar to you. Maybe not this exact process, but the modern equivalent. It hasn't changed terribly much. And then the most exciting feature that we found in this past season's excavation was this guy. So there's a lot of stones at Camp Security, and oftentimes we're digging down and we see a whole bunch of stones and we're thinking, oh, maybe this is a foundation. But the elements for a foundation just typically aren't there. So for a foundation, typically you're going to need to have dug a foundation trench or a builder's trench to set your stones in. Your stones are typically going to be worked, flattened, squared off, so that way they can more easily stack on top of each other. In this case, what we have is worked stone. So this stone is worked. It's nice and squared off, flat. In some cases, it's pretty clear that the stones actually fit together at some point. And they are set within this darker feature. So this red soil here, that's subsoil. That's natural. That's a natural layer. This dirt here, all that dark dirt, that is sort of like a trench or a hole or a pit. Somebody came along and dug that out and filled it in. What you're looking at is possibly a foundation that got pushed over and then backfilled, essentially. Artifact-wise, we did pull out some artifacts out of this. Not a ton of artifacts, but everything that did come out was 18th century. So this almost certainly dated to the camp period, and is sort of our first instance of stone architecture from camp security, dating to the camp period. This is a modern example of sort of what I'm talking about. Again, you have your stone that's being built up inside of this dugout thing here. Now, if you can imagine, you just coming along and kicking that over. That's my mother. Thanks, Mom. Appreciate it. So you can imagine somebody coming along and kicking that over. You're probably going to see something very close to this. Then here's an example of like the finished product, right? So the stones aren't mortared together; they're all dry laid, and that's what we have here. Sort of a modern, not, I don't want to call it modern. It's an old, old barn, but a sort of currently standing example. And if you take a drive around Springettsbury Township, you could probably think of or have seen similar barns like this, or similar examples where we have dry laid stone. It's kind of amazing sometimes how all those stones kind of fit together and are still standing. So when we started the project in 2014, this was our understanding of camp security. We knew where Camp Indulgence was. We had the 1979 excavation to thank for that, but that was pretty much it. That was the extent of our understanding. Today, this is sort of my more current impression of the site, with Camp Indulgence extending further south here. The stockade in the lower field, a possible guard post. So this is where our stone architecture is. I think, and given the position of where this is on a slope. So if you're standing on the slope, you can see, it gives you overwatch over the entire field. It gives you a commanding view. And given the stone architecture, likely would have been more related to guards than prisoners. And then we also have our possible firing line out here. And it's subject to change. Don't hold me to this. As we get new information, interpretations change. The National Park Service project is still underway, so we're still doing the post-field processing. That's what I'm doing currently. So this includes artifact curation, report writing, etc. But I'd like to take a minute to sort of reflect on the impact community archaeology has had on the site and looking towards the future of camp security. One of the biggest developments has been the creation of a master plan for the site. As part of this planning, consultants received comments from Springettsbury Township residents. Some people just want it left alone. Others worry about wildlife. Some people see open space and think soccer fields, recreation facilities. And others want to focus on the history by creating like an interpretive center or recreating the stockade. In general, the majority public opinion has been to focus on low impact development, things like walking trails and signage, with a focus on interpreting the historic site. So this is the plan that the township approved. It involves a series of walking trails, some restrooms, pavilions, and a central boardwalk path that leads to the lower field and overlooks where the stockade once stood. And this is sort of the end of that path. The plan also calls for continued archaeological programming, things like Talk to an Archaeologist Day or yearly excavations. A more ambitious plan also included curatorial space for storing and displaying artifacts. The 250th anniversary of the country's founding and the archaeological work leading up to this point helped lay the groundwork for Camp Security to be one of the sites to receive a fair amount of the benefit of the 250th. For example, as part of PA 250, each county received a Liberty Bell to install at a historic site, and Camp Security was chosen for York County. So you can still go to Camp Security Park and take a look at the bell. I believe it's brass, right? Yeah. Our work has also done quite well in spreading awareness on a national level. So we were covered in the AP, and newspapers across the country picked up the story. These papers included the Washington Post and the LA Times. And on a local level, we're pretty consistently in the local newspapers and TV news. Very close. Very close. So this is a question I get quite often. It's expected that a project has a beginning and an end. And a lot of times archaeology can be perceived as being in the way of some larger project. But the goals of preserving, protecting, and finding are pretty continuous. Conditions change, but that work really doesn't have an end. One of the most important things about Camp Security is that it's the only site of its kind that we can do this type of research at. All the other sites are inaccessible to archaeologists and researchers. They've either been destroyed, so I'm talking about the other like sister prison camps. They've either been destroyed or they're on private property. So Camp Security is extremely unique as a site. So the work at Camp Security likely won't have an immediate end to it. And that's okay. That's how it probably should be. Because as soon as that does end, so will the site and its story. And I'd like to thank some of the organizations that have helped fund our projects through the years. The Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission, the Park Service for the current project that we're working through, and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And our partners over the years. So we can't do everything ourselves. We don't have, or I definitely don't have the expertise or the equipment to do all of the things we want to do. So partnering with these universities and organizations has been of great help. And of course, the highlight, all of the volunteers that have assisted us over the past decade of archaeology at Camp Security. Look for your name if you volunteered. And and if I missed you, I apologize, although I shouldn't have. All right, well, thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions that any of you have. Yes, sir.
So are you 100% sure of where the book was at this point?
Of where it was? Yes.
Yes, you're 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, we don't know, there's a lot we don't know still. So we don't know the full scale of like the stockade. We don't know its orientation. We don't know the extent of the camp itself. So we're very confident in the two fields that we're currently in, and so that's the west half of the property. We have the row half of the property where that firing line is. Feel pretty good about that, but the row upper field, so it's that other field that's just east of where the indulgence field is, that has never been really surveyed, so we don't know anything about it.
So what would you like to see happen?
What would I like to see happen? So I would be interested in looking at the first surveying that portion of that field that we haven't surveyed. So I'd like to get the Veterans Archaeology Program, the guys who did the metal detecting last year. I'd like for them to test that field. And then I'd like to investigate camp indulgence a little more. So we've investigated, the State Museum did a pretty thorough job of the upper third of that field, but now we have evidence saying that it's much bigger, and I'd like to be able to put some units in, maybe do some GPR, that kind of thing, in that field to try and confirm that. Yeah.
The picture you showed with the GPR of the field where the stockade was, there was a section in the bottom center that didn't have any of the black starry, image. Is that where the slope was, or was there?
That's.
Or wasn't there data in that piece?
I think so. There there wasn't like a block there?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's where the slope is.
Okay.
There's just no data there, unfortunately. Yeah.
Where is Sergeant Lamb's diary located?
I believe it's at the British Archives?
Yeah.
Methodist Historical Society of Ireland.
He knows. I had no shot.
Can you repeat the questions, the microphone?
Oh, yeah, I can do it. Yeah, sorry.
Could you repeat the question? I didn't hear the
Oh, he wanted to know where the Sergeant Lamb journals are currently being held. Yes, you.
Where are the collected artifacts stored?
Yes, so all of the artifacts, where are the collected artifacts stored? All of the artifacts are stored at the State Museum of Pennsylvania. So they're in Harrisburg. That's where the 79 collection is, and everything that we do after every year, I catalog the artifacts, and then the township gifts them to the State Museum for permanent storage.
So if there would be a building built, would they come back on this flag to camp security?
The state would gift them or loan them to the township, which they've done in the past.
And they will still do.
And they will still do, yes. Yeah, that's a pretty common thing, yeah. Yes.
How deep do you dig, like that farmland, you're trying to get beyond the farm? What is the depth? A foot?
Oh, so what's the depth of our excavations?
Yes.
Typically a foot, so the plow zone is usually about a foot.
Okay.
So-
And also, what is the value of that grant?
What's the value of the grant, like the cash value?
Yes.
It's just under $150,000.
And how is that appropriated? How's that spent?
So how's the grant spent? So the grant was spent for the GPR. So basically, the Forensic Camp Security contract with like IUP or the Indiana University of Pennsylvania to do the GPR. They contract out to do the metal detecting,
Oh,
that kind of thing.
I
Yeah.
didn't know if all that was volunteer, or if that wasn't donated. You had to pay for that.
Yeah. That had to be paid. Yeah.
I asked a lot of questions. In your opinion, what's the neatest artifact you found?
What's the neatest artifact I have found? I would say the oboe key is probably the neatest. That's probably my favorite artifact that we've ever found at Camp Security. Now, if you go back to 79, they found some really cool stuff, one of which is the Weeping Heart brooch, which is, is it on my hat? No, it's not the right hat. Dang. But if you go to campsecurity.org, the logo is the Weeping Heart brooch, and the current artifact is at the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia, so it's on display there. Yes, sir.
Most of your excavation's been in open areas. Was the tree line basically the way it was since it was way back then? And did you excavate anything in the trees or?
That's a great question. Yeah, so was the tree line, was that always there, and did we ever excavate in the tree line? We did excavate in the tree line. We excavated shovel test pits in the tree line. You can't really do big open air. You can, but it's a pain because of all the trees. So we excavated shovel test pits in that tree line. And what we found was that the soil is really mixed up. this is all publicly accessible, so if you go to a site called PASDA, they have historic aerial images. And if you look at the oldest, I believe, that they have for camp security is 1938, I want to say, 1937, something like that. And if you look at that photo, there are no trees there. Then, if you look at in 1948, the trees still aren't there, but now there are terraces in the hillside. So between 1938 and 1948, somebody came along and dug terraces in the hillside where the tree line is presently. And then when you get to the 50s, that's when you start to see some trees growing there. A lot of the trees in that area are pretty young, and they're kind of sickly too. They fall down a lot. But yeah.
Kind of follow up on that, what roads or lanes, if any, were in existence at the time of the camp to get, say, into York or anything? Were there roads, or was it just like a farmland that they would walk along?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So were there any roads that are sort of presently here that would have been there in the 18th century? Don't know, and that's kind of a bit of a mystery. So 30 or Market Street may have been a little further south than it is today, but outside of that, it's very iffy. That's sort of it's kind of a question in terms of like what were the avenues of approach for people to get to the camp, and we really don't know. Yes?
The tree line on the west side, there's a stream bed that comes down from the top of the hill. Does that define the camp?
Are you talking about the where the spring is?
Well,
Or
there's
is-
a stream that comes down from all the way up the top of the hill, and it's fairly wide, about 100 yards wide, I believe.
Oh, on the east side or the west side? I'm sorry.
It's on the west side.
Yeah.
And there's a stream bed.
Mm-hmm.
Does that define the camp area that you
So-
showed in your drawings there?
Yeah. So the question was about the stream on the western edge of the property. That stream the camp may have been on the other side of that stream. Like parts of the camp may have been on the other side of that. But in terms of property boundaries, that's basically the property boundary that we have access to.
Because on the west side of that stream bed, it's all houses down there.
Yes, yeah, so that's Penn Oaks development. Yeah. So we can't like go on the other side of that stream,
No, but I just
basically.
want to know if that
Define
defined
the camp,
the west side, yes.
I don't know. It very well may be that the portions of the camp may have been on the other side, I don't know.
That'd be a source of water for the prison camp.
Yes. Yes, so that would have been a source of water for the prison camp. That, and there's also a spring that's pretty centrally located. It's right where all of the tree lines kind of meet, sort of at the center point of the property. There's a pretty large spring, and there's even still a spring house, though it is kind of collapsed in on itself, but there is a spring house there as well that would have fed water down to the Schultz house, which is the house that would have been there at the time of the camp, though that pipe isn't historic. Yeah.
Do you happen to know when the township is going to begin development?
Yes. Okay, so the question is, when will the township begin development for the master plan? I have no idea. Yeah. Yes.
Do you have a preliminary excavation schedule for, say, the next 10 years? What does that look like?
All right, so do I have a preliminary excavation schedule for the next 10 years?
Yeah.
Sure. No, though I think there may be a desire to want to do an excavation next year. Ideally, that would either be in the spring or the fall. I like to stay away from summer months and the winter for obvious reasons. But yeah, I can't promise 10 years, I know. Any other questions?
Thank you.
All right, thank you.